Okay, so number 5 on our list is lobbying and media influence. So before we jump in, I'd like to kind of separate the two terms because they're related but not really the same. So I'd like to just talk about lobbying first. Okay, so we'll get to media influence, but we'll start with lobbying. So first thing, let's talk about what lobbying is. Essentially, it's a channel for people, individual people, or certain groups that have a certain, I guess, they have a certain cause, okay? And essentially, it's a way for them to contact the government and try and influence some of the changes or influence certain changes to happen in terms of how the government passes laws and how they make changes essentially in how the country's run. Now, just naturally, as it's originally thought of, it's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? So the idea of lobbying really comes from that we need the people's voices to be heard within the actual practices of the government. So let's say that you are someone that feels very, very passionate about people. I don't know, what's a good example? Let's see. You're very passionate about
the environment.
Yes, that's a very good reason because that is a very popular lobby group. So say you're very passionate about the environment and you feel that the current decisions that are being made in the government is not really aligning with your own. And you're finding that there's millions of people around you that clearly want to protect the environment, but it seems like the government actions don't reflect that. So what you can do is you can get together a group of people that share your same cause and essentially approach a lobbying company and hire a lobbyist to kind of take your message to the government and say, hey, we have millions of people in this country that are passionate about protecting the environment. So let's get this person. So let's try and make these changes because look at all these people that are caring about the environment. So some of the pros in a system like that where individual people can have voices in the function of the government, not just in the election or bringing in the government. Okay. So some of the pros is that it lets everyday people have influence on the government. Okay. Like in the previous example, you can really try and make changes as to what the values and the practices are of your current ruling government. Number 2, government can hear what the people have to say. So sometimes it's not like this. The government is not unwilling to listen to what the people have to say. In fact, they're very happy to listen to what people have to say. And the fact that there are lobbyist groups that are working hard to try and have that conversation with the government is welcomed. And in fact, that they want to hear what they want to say, or what people have to say, because at the end of the day, for them to return as the party that's in power after the next election, okay, they kind of have to know what the people generally want. Okay. And number 3, the existence of lobby groups creates stronger opposition to political actions that are not necessarily for the will of the people. So say there's a political party that is either intentionally or unintentionally, they're making some choices that are very, very against the general will of the people. Okay, so common examples are a government really wants to go to war against another nation. Okay, a lobby group really can rise up and say, actually, the people have no interest in this war.
A government creates a carbon tax.
Yeah, or a government creating a carbon tax. Okay, so it's so there's different examples of the positives, because really, at the end of the day, the government's main purpose is to serve the will of the people, and having lobbying groups can very often make sure that that is exactly what's happening. Some of the cons here are there's actually a lot of different cons, and really I can represent the cons generally with a story of how the term lobbying even came into practice. So in the United States, there was a president by the name of Ulysses S. Grant, and he actually came up with the term lobbyists because there were all these people that had a lot of things to say or a lot of things to ask of the United States president. And oftentimes they would track him down in a certain lobby in Washington, D.C., okay, and essentially buy him drinks so that the president would sit down and listen to what those people would have to say. So this president, Ulysses S. Grant, started calling these people lobbyists, okay, because they would track him down in lobbies and buy him drinks. And much like the acceptance of drinks, I mean, it's not that big of a deal for a politician to take a drink and listen to some of his constituents. But really, in a larger sense, that spirit of, yes, we'll accept some favors in order for us to listen to you, has kind of amplified. And this is more of an issue in the United States. I mean, we're not impervious to it in Canada, but in the United States, we often see that the process of lobbying opens a door for corruption via corporations. Meaning, well, if we're hiring lobbyists to pass on a message, who's going to be the best at passing on messages? Who's going to be the best at getting politicians to sit down and have a drink and listen to the message? It's going to be the groups that can afford the best drinks or the best steak dinner. So essentially, the more money you have, the more likely the politicians are willing to sit down and listen to you. Okay? So individually, no matter how much us individuals feel passionately about certain causes, at the end of the day, as individual people, we're not going to have nearly as much money as corporations will in kind of hiring lobbyists to contact politicians. So oftentimes, corporations with more money have more say in the system. So if it's a system where, yes, it's meant to have some sort of feedback loop, right, so that the individuals can have a say in government. But what happens when corporations, because they have so much money, they're drowning out the individual voices, and they're really the only one that's making use of this lobbying system. Okay? And corporations can also kind of pull money out of the government system, meaning tax dollars, because they can buy lucrative government contracts. Okay? I mean, the government needs to spend money on building military and, doing construction for, what's the word I'm looking for?
Roadways.
Roads, right? Government buildings. But it's not like the government has factories that they privately own to build tanks or, jets. So some private corporation is going to have to do that. And oftentimes, the corporations that kind of lobby the most effectively will get these contracts. And because of the system, it should be based on who can provide the best service for the least amount of price. But now it's just who is willing to donate more money to which party that often decide who gets these government contracts, which is a bit of a broken system, and I think goes against the spirit of the free market that kind of the society is based on. And we also see corporate dependency during election campaigns via donations. So again, politicians like to stay in power for as long as possible, okay? And when they are thinking ahead to their next re-election campaign, oftentimes a lot of their political decisions while they're in power is based on who's going to give them the most amount of donations. Obviously, it's going to be corporations. So essentially, in some way, a lot of the politicians, to a certain degree, can be bought out by corporations just based on them kind of thinking about the future campaigning. Because in the United States, you need millions and millions of dollars to just even be considered to run for president. Okay?
George Bush's election in 2001 cost like $380 million. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people liked the idea of Donald Trump, was because he allegedly ran on this idea of not being a corporate buyout, yet he represented the corporation. So,
yeah. So it's an idea that's been kind of in the media quite a bit, and honestly, it's really, in the United States especially, the idea of corporate lobby groups are so entrenched in the system that at this point, I don't know if it would function as the same system if they were to just pull it out from its roots altogether, if that makes sense. Okay. And another really dark aspect of this kind of political lobbying system that we have is often politicians in the United States aren't going into politics as a way because they're passionate about making sure that the country runs as, they believe is the most correct way. Oftentimes these people are running as politicians, and they're trying to eventually get to a point where they can find a high-paying lobbyist position. So they will get into politics, Okay, they'll kind of rise up amongst the ranks, okay, and they'll make connections. And with those connections, eventually they would like to get to a high-paying corporate job, rather than you kind of have to be an idealist to be a politician, I think. And sometimes the idealized position is just used as a stepping stone to a corporate, well-paying job.
And the term that is used for that is, they call this in the United States, they call it the revolving door scenario. So you go into politics with these high ideals, you leave politics with the intention of becoming a lobbyist, so you can use your political influence to be a hired man for corporations.
So that's kind of what lobbying is, and I'd like to try and kind of connect it to media influence, because I feel like it's something that's relatively self-explanatory. The idea of the media having influence over what our decisions are in terms of politics. I think more and more as society goes on and it becomes more globalized and technology becomes more involved, I think we are finding that there is, directly due to media, just the way that the media is presenting the news, certain politicians, there's more of a sense of increased bipartisanship, meaning that people are more and more on either sides of the spectrum, rather than trying to meet somewhere in the middle. Are you a liberal? Are you a conservative? And a lot of this really is a difficult balance to kind of figure out, because at what point is your willingness to watch a certain, I guess, media form, right? If you watch Fox News, you're going to have certain political views. If you're going to watch, say, John Oliver or The Daily Show, are you going to have liberal views on how politics is running? And it's difficult because when we're talking about corruption via corporations, in the United States, like, media is run by corporations. So at what point is the media able to affect what happens in the government via lobbying internally within the government structure, as well as on the outside, right, with the constituents, the individual voters? Okay, they're also controlling maybe some of the things that we're watching, seeing, or even to an extreme degree what we're thinking in terms of politics. So the danger really, because remember, we're really talking about major things to consider when we're talking about the viability, or how well is the system that we're currently in going to last into the future. This is a huge, huge thing that we need to think about, right? The corporations and the corruption that they're kind of causing within the system via lobbying and media influence is arguably one of the biggest problems that we kind of need to tackle right now.
Do you think it's as lobbying? Do you think that's as big of a problem in Canada?
No, I don't think. I mean, I don't know the exact details, but as far as I know, in terms of things like even like election campaigns and donations, there's a way smaller limitation to what the corporations can kind of donate.
Way greater limitation.
Yeah, greater limitations, right? Meaning they're not able to contribute as much money. So they're less of a player when thinking about running for election, because there's only so much the corporations can give you, as opposed to in the United States, it seems like there's different things like the dark money, okay, which is essentially some really convoluted way of corporations donating money to individual candidates. Essentially, at this point, it seems like the contributions that could be made is limitless. So then at what point is it just corporations really running for presidency in the United States, and how much of it is actual political and moral ideals of what a country should look like that is running for presidency?
Yeah. Okay, I just want to say one more thing.
Sure.
Point this at me. Point this at me. Oh, hey, guys. Just one other thing about media that I just was thinking about while Brian was talking is the impact of like media polls. And so if you guys don't know what polls are, these are institutions or companies that their job is to kind of like predict the outcomes of elections before they happen. And so you think about the impact that can have on voters. Like if the media portrays that the election is going, like in the last election, the election is going towards Donald Trump, or the election is going towards Joe Biden, does that impact the way that you vote? Like, is it possible if you were planning, like we saw this a lot with the Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump election, there were a lot of people that were like, well, I'm not overly a big fan of of Hillary Clinton, but I'm going to vote for her anyway, just because the polls are saying that Donald Trump's going to win. So they're voting like strategically. So polls are actually impacting the way that people vote, even though polls are only a prediction. They're not an actual reality. So that's another impact that the media can have. So you think about like the impact of media on people's ideology. If the media tells you something over and over and over and over again, even if it's not necessarily true, you come to kind of believe those things as truth. And the media source may eventually go back and say, like we saw this with the Donald Trump issues surrounding the allegations of corruption with Russia, where CNN over and over and over again said that he's in bed with the Russians, him and Vladimir Putin are buddies. But then later on, after there was trials and a hearing on this and a whole bunch of investigations, we found that Donald Trump wasn't in bed with Russia. And then CNN had to go back and say, well, Russia wasn't in bed with Russia. But everybody that's been watching CNN for the last 2 years is like, well, he probably is. I mean, they said it enough. He probably is in bed with Russia, even though there must have been an issue in the investigation, right? What we see on media has a huge impact on what we come to believe. That's why propaganda is such an effective tool for political ideology and political parties. That's why Hitler said over and over again, well, the Jews are evil, the Jews are evil. Well, at first people didn't believe that. But over time, people begin to believe there must be something about the Jews. I've heard it enough, right? So media has a huge impact. Now, in saying that, it's not like we want to suppress the media, but it does call to question your responsibility as citizens to think about how you respond to media and how you think about the media. So this is just kind of a couple of extra thoughts.